I was 13 years old back then. I lived in a medium-sized town close to a forest preserve, about 2 minutes away from us. My family and I often walked down those trails. They curve up and down every which way, so it can be difficult in spots to see up ahead very far. It was October, but there were still leaves on the trees. One day after school, I came home and put my bag down on the ground. I went into the kitchen, which overlooks the backyard. In the backyard, I saw something strange. There was this animal, the size of a grown man, on the ground. It was about 10 feet away from me. Even though it was still quite bright out, the creature was pitch black. It seemed like a shadow had peeled itself off the ground and crouched down. All my breath was taken from my lungs, and I just stood there. Eventually, it looked at me and froze, its black eyes drilling into my soul. Then it stood up, revealing legs. They were unnaturally long, and with impossible speed, it ran towards our fence and jumped right over. I was so shocked, I just stood there, with a terrified expression on my face. Eventually, I broke out of my shock. Being the ignorant teenager I was, I ran outside onto the street, looking both ways. On the left, I saw it again. It saw me as well and ran down the street. It ran down the path to the forest preserve, and I followed it. Walking down the path, I noticed something weird. It was quiet, and I mean like it was absolutely silent. No bugs, nothing. I was slightly weirded out by this, but kept on walking down the path. About halfway down, I saw it again. That thing was standing there over a dead deer in the middle of the trail. Again, I found myself unable to move. Once more, it spotted me. It then let out the loudest, most ear-splitting screech I've ever heard and began running towards me. I began to run back, faster than I'd ever run before. Maybe it didn't want to catch me. Maybe adrenaline can do some pretty fascinating things. But I managed to make it home, slamming the door behind me and collapsing on the couch. I was both exhausted and terrified. I could hear it walking outside for some time, before finally leaving. When my mom got home, I didn't tell her about this, knowing that she wouldn't believe me. I didn't tell anyone else either. For now, I haven't seen it again. So to begin my story, I have to let you know what happened too close to home for comfort. In the winter of 2000, we moved from the Midwest to a southern state, where we purchased a good 80-something acres. We're horse people and love the trail ride, as well as participate in the local rodeos. That being said, we had about 8 horses on the property at the time. None of them were very skittish at all. We had many other animals and do a lot of hunting on our land as well. I've never felt scared on our property, even on moonless nights with only the glow of my LG flip phone, or whenever I'd sneak out of the house at night, walking the quarter-mile through the fields and trees to the end of my driveway. That's where my friend would be waiting to pick me up for our adventures. One night when I was a bit older, 19 to 20-ish, my younger brother was around 15 or 16, the two of us and my live-in boyfriend at the time decided to go and watch the stars. We had the best view from the middle of our driveway that was between a horse pasture and an open, marshy, tall grassland-like area. The grass was always tall because it was always so muddy on that side. We could never completely brush hog it all with the tractor or mow it with a lawnmower. This marshy area is to the left side of us and the horse barn to the right. The horse barn was just this open building with stalls, but at the time the horses weren't in there. They were grazing around the barn. We were lying on the warm hood of my Mercury Cougar with a blanket under us, watching the stars and catching a few shooting stars here and there too. Everything was calm and beautiful as it always felt, listening to the beautiful song of our local coyote pack as they howled at the moon. All of a sudden, a new sound sent chills throughout all of us. We heard this howl that was different from the coyotes' howls. It didn't even sound like a wolf. My uncle, who lived with us, was a huge wolf guy. I'd like to think I knew what they sounded like, and I could tell the difference between a wolf and a coyote howl. This was neither, and when it howled the first time, everything else just shut up in response. Everything went quiet, and then, not too long later, we heard it again. We then heard the coyotes scattering in the distance, or at least that's what we thought it was. Now I'm not so sure, but at the time it made sense with what we encountered. The horses were acting super nervous when just before, when the coyotes were singing, they were calm and grazing. Now they were snorting and flicking their ears in all directions, noses blowing, as they tried to see what the danger was around them. We then decided it would probably be a good time to head back inside the house to grab a gun and flashlight. So we go to turn the car around, and we spot something. Whatever it is, it looks like the silhouette of a very large, mangy wolf. On the way to the house, we had to cross a creek bed that recently was pretty washed out, and it off-centered my car on a rock, getting us stuck. This meant we had to walk in the dark without protection for about a third to a half of the length of a football field. What made this part scary was the fact that we had to climb this big, steep hill and go through a bunch of overgrown trees on the way. All the while, that feeling that someone or something was watching and possibly following us. My brother ran like a bullet back to the house, out of breath and freaking out our parents when he got back. He told them what we saw and explained that we needed to investigate. I, however, refused to run because I knew that could trigger a predator's instincts. When you run, they run, wanting to chase down their prey. No, this girl was very cautious, trying to make as little noise as possible. I jogged from tree to tree, hoping that if something did come after me, maybe I could get up one of these trees fast enough. My boyfriend walked fast right up the middle of the hill and was in the house before I was. So yeah, the boys left the only girl alone outside. Soon I made it too. My parents gave us the keys to the truck, a spotlight, and the Beretta handgun. Then the three of us headed for that opening where the horses got nervous. From the truck, using the spotlight, there in that marshy area, we spotted about 24 sets of glowing red eyes. Each set was only about a foot or so off the ground, but these things' backs were much taller. As we tried to get a good look at them, they would stay out of the ring of light from the spotlight. No matter what we did, we couldn't get a really good look at them, but I will describe what we could see. Their heads were low to the ground. They were super thin and skinny. Their front end was much lower than the hindquarters. They could stand up like a person too, hopping up on a round hay bale like this. They seemed very intelligent too. We pulled the truck in as far as we could. Then we shut off the lights of the truck for about 5 minutes. Then we kicked on the high beams, hoping to surprise these animals. But they were still in the grass just on the edge, where our lights would touch the ground and surrounding area, instead of them. My boyfriend got out of the truck with the gun to get closer, to see if he could shoot one, so we could find out what they were. After all, they seemed to be dangerous to the horses. As he did this, my brother and I stayed in the truck, controlling the lights and watching around him for a sneak attack or anything like it. Come to find out, that is exactly what they were trying to do. At least a dozen of them were circled in a half circle around him before long, with the truck at his back, while another group of them was off to the right of us under the branches of the tree line. They were making noises and jumping on the old rotten hay bales that we had over there at the time. It was insane because it seemed like they were trying to say, "Hey, look over here, let us distract you." These animals were too smart, and there were too many of them. Then it happened. My boyfriend fired a shot, then another. He fired 6 in a row in rapid succession, which seemed to make contact because something fell to the ground and didn't move. When he tried to get closer to see if he got it, they got protective of it and began to close the circle. He then said screw this, if he did kill it he would just get it tomorrow, when it was safe and the sun was up. He told us, let's get out of here. Quickly, we drove home, telling everyone what happened and what we saw. The next morning after the sun came up around 6:30 to 7ish, We went to go and see if we could find blood or the body, but all we found was a flat circle in the grass where you could tell something had laid down there. But no blood, no trail, no hair, nothing. That was the only evidence we had, and it wasn't enough. We talked to so many local hunters, game wardens, park rangers, military, everyone I knew who might have a game camera or possibly had seen it before. But no, the only answers I got were mountain lions or possibly boars. I know for a fact it wasn't either of those. Mountain lions and panthers don't hunt in packs, and they do not act like that. And boars, let's be real, those were not boars. So what was this? A chupacabra? Wild dogs? Coyotes? I don't think we'll ever know. But I still live in the same house. I have my own kids now, and even today I make sure that we are all very cautious. If we are out at night, we have protection and a big fire in the yard. I want to set up game cams, but I think I'd rather not find out what's lurking around our property. By the way, this property used to be Native American land and burial grounds. I know this from the college coming out and finding pottery and arrowheads around here. My son even says he sees these things called hide-behinds at night when he looks out the windows. So maybe we have skinwalkers. But whatever it is, there is always something unexplainable happening around here. But it's still my home, and I would not live anywhere else. I have a friend named James who used to live in the Midwest, near the Kentucky-Tennessee border. He enjoyed it there a lot, but eventually decided to move after he had what he called an encounter like no other. He swears by his life that everything he recounted to me about it was true, and he wanted me to share this story with others. He never talks about it nowadays because it just sounds so strange. In 2017, he had just moved after getting a new job. He found a nice ranch house after searching for a long time. He found that the price was almost as much as an average rent and asked the realtor why it was so cheap. She told him, well, the previous owner was going on about some kind of creature. James laughed as he was a skeptic about these kinds of things. Ghosts, fairies, elves, Nessie, Yeti, you name it. These were all just flights of fancy to him. He didn't believe her and told her as much. The woman shrugged and didn't say anything further. And as he stood there, he thought he heard a small giggle from behind him. When he turned, he saw nothing. He ended up getting the place and moved in as quickly as possible. After moving in was when the terror began. One morning, he walked outside and found a dead rabbit. That was normal until he saw just how it was killed, completely gutted like a fish. He didn't see a knife or anything and wondered how it had been killed like that so cleanly. He also saw a trail of blood leading to a garden he had in the backyard. This made him feel uneasy. Suddenly, he heard this weird laugh coming from the back of the property. He sprinted back inside and slammed the door. He peeked outside, seeing this odd creature that stood only about 2 feet tall in the backyard. He says it looked just like a gnome. He immediately called the realtor, demanding to know why she had not mentioned it. She said she had, and he didn't believe her. James was determined to stick it out for as long as he could, but this gnome had other ideas. Every night the gnome would emerge and scratch on the wall, knock on the doors, tap on the windows, all while giving off that blood-chilling laugh. Every morning he would leave, but return at night. This gnome also gutted deer, more rabbits, squirrels, and birds, leaving the gruesome evidence behind for James to find. Eventually, James saw him come out during the day. In fact, James always looked all around his property before he left to go somewhere, so that he wouldn't be ambushed. One day he came back from a movie at a friend's house and saw the gnome watching from behind a tree, just waiting. He and the gnome just stared each other down, But then the gnome began to frolic through the garden while laughing. James had had enough. He quit his job and moved away. On the day he loaded his final possessions, he turned out of the driveway and was going down the road when the gnome ran right out onto the road. James slammed on the brakes and waited. The gnome glared at him, then smiled and ran off. I don't know if someone else owns that house now. James doesn't know, and he doesn't even care. He and I both have the same thought. Whether or not someone owns it is a moot point. We both know the one constant, that gnome is probably still there, waiting and watching for a new owner to torment. I live in rural New England. I like to spend my free time exploring the back roads and woods in the area. You see, I'm an artist, and I like finding beautiful, secluded places to paint or draw. I have one such spot not far from me that I like to hike regularly, and on one unreasonably warm November day, I decided to head out and spend some time in the woods with my sketchbook. The trail is an old abandoned logging road that meanders through the woods along a river and leads to a rocky ledge and waterfall. The path is bordered by stone walls that used to separate the fields and farmland that once dominated the area. The trail is known by locals, but not many others. Most visitors to the area prefer to hike the more well-known mountain trails nearby. It was rare for me to bump into anyone else, and I preferred the solitude. It was hunting season, so I was relieved to see, as I pulled my car off the road, that there weren't any vehicles parked at the start of the trail. I wouldn't have to worry about anyone disturbing me, or me disturbing anyone else. Like I said, my goal was to find peace and solitude in the forest, not small talk. Nevertheless, I donned a blaze orange hat, and I tied a bright scarf to my backpack so I would be visible. I hiked into the waterfall without any issues, spending a lovely morning at the base of the falls, photographing the scenery and drawing in my sketchbook. The forest was beautiful. I would just sit and soak it all in. I felt safe in those woods. After a while, I began to slowly work my way back, stopping frequently to take pictures or just admire the scenery more. I got about halfway down the trail where, off to one side, there is a small graveyard from the 1800s. Directly opposite that, there is a gap in the stone wall and a small path leading down a ridge deeper into the woods, closer to the river. This was an unusual choice for me. I was wary of hunters this time of year, and just being a woman hiking alone, I always had the worst possible scenario on the back of my mind. I preferred to stick to the trail, play it safe. But the woods today were intoxicating. The light filtered through the last of the leaves clinging to the trees, casting a golden glow on everything. The path was overgrown, but I picked my way closer to the water. It had rained the day before, and the river was running full and fast. I could hear it rushing over the rocks at the bottom of the ridge. As I came closer, I finally caught sight of the river. I stopped there to admire the sight before me. Then I pulled out my camera, pointing it at the river, and I began to take pictures. I moved closer, but as I did, I began to get this anxious feeling at the back of my mind. It was like something just wasn't right. I started to feel like maybe I was no longer alone out there. I chalked it up to paranoia. It was probably just an animal, and I started climbing down onto the rocks to get closer, when suddenly I looked up to see a figure standing in the woods on the other side of that river. What was more worrisome was the fact that this figure seemed to be looking right at me, almost leering from behind a small group of trees. It startled me. I thought I was by myself, but maybe a hunter had hiked in after me and had set himself up out there, away from the main trail. I offered a timid wave. If it was a hunter, I didn't want to make more noise than I already had. The figure, though, did not acknowledge me. I looked closer, and I noticed that it wasn't moving. In fact, it was eerily still and really looked too tall, too skinny to be a person. It had to have been 7 to 8 feet tall, and although I had the distinct feeling that it was looking at me, I couldn't make out any discernible features other than a head and shoulders. It seemed to almost blend with its surroundings like camouflage. It was just this grayish silhouette. I thought that maybe it was a trick of the light falling through the trees. Maybe it was just a creepy shadow. I shivered despite the warmth of the day as the hairs on my arm pricked up. I shook my head and I turned my attention back to the river. I began walking along the rocks, snapping pictures of the flowing water. I felt silly that I'd spooked myself over nothing. I'd made it maybe another 10 yards when I looked up again and my stomach sank as I saw what looked like the same dark figure now standing across the river from me in the trees. Were they following me? How did I not notice someone walking along the opposite bank matching my pace? I called out to them. "Hello." The figure shifted almost imperceptibly, but didn't respond. It had to be a hunter, or maybe I'd gone too far off the trail and was trespassing. My heart was now pounding in my chest. I called out again. "Hello? I'm sorry. I was just taking some pictures of the river since it's so nice out. Really, I didn't mean to bother you. I'll be going now." It stared back in eerie silence. I looked away, and then I looked back to see that the figure had now vanished. I thought my mind must have been playing tricks on me. Whatever that shadowy figure was, I wanted nothing to do with it. My small, nagging anxiety was ballooning to panic. A shadow in the woods was one thing, but a shadowy figure following me was quite another. I turned and started making my way back the way I came, trying to keep my attention focused on my feet, worried that in my agitation I would slip and fall on the wet, mossy rocks. But every time I looked up, that thing was directly across the river, sometimes only peeking from behind the trees, but always keeping up with me without ever actually seeming to move. Then it would just disappear and reappear like a flicker. The only comfort to me was that I kept a hunting knife in my pocket and the swiftly running river between me and whoever or whatever that was. That had to offer me some protection, right? I turned to look across the river for a last time, and sure enough, that thing was even closer now, still watching me. I didn't understand how it moved so quickly between the trees without being seen. I started up the steep ridge, and as the sound of the river faded, I could hear a rustle, then twigs snapping behind me. I turned to look, but the forest was still. I quickened my pace, but I knew there was no way I could outrun whatever it was anyway. I just tried to focus on my breathing, clutching the knife in my pocket, hoping that I wouldn't need to use it. I could hear the thing darting around behind me, branches and twigs snapping on my left, then on my right, like it was zigzagging across the path. I was so scared I could no longer turn to look behind me. I just tried to move as swiftly and carefully as I could. I finally made it back to the main path, and the noises behind me stopped. I couldn't hear anything behind me anymore, but I started noticing birds chirping again. I guess I hadn't realized that the forest had been almost too quiet by the river. I kept up a pretty brisk pace all the way back to my car, holding my knife the entire time. Mine was still the only car in the lot when I returned, so I know there wasn't another person on the trail with me. I told my husband about what happened when I got home, but he really isn't one for the spooky, so despite that gut feeling I had, we agreed it was probably nothing, and I really didn't think of it much after that. About a year later, I came across an article detailing monster legends and cryptids from the area, and as I read, I was blown away by the description of wood devils, tall, slim creatures that lurk in the woods. They're said to have gray skin and hair, and they blend in with the surrounding trees by standing still. It is reported that they move quickly, darting from tree to tree. My skin crawled while I read a description that eerily matched my experience. I can't say for sure what I saw, but I know it was not my imagination. I still go hiking in that area. I feel like if that creature wanted to hurt me, it had more than enough opportunity that day, but it chose not to. In my opinion, I think maybe it was just curious, or maybe it recognized I wasn't a threat, or maybe I'm just dumb lucky. I can assure you that whenever I go out to hike, I always bring my knife and my dog with me, and I never stray from the trail.